My name is Sreeja Mohandas and I'm an author. I'm really happy to be part of CSF 24 this time, and a big hello to all you story lovers, fellow story lovers. The story I plan to share with you today is one of my own and is titled The Rendezvous or The Meeting. And the story goes like this. He walked into the restaurant looking very confident, as any successful man would, a little impatient, twirling his keys, and the minute he entered, steward rushed to him and escorted him to the table that he had reserved, one in a very cozy alcove near huge bay windows that overlooked a terracotta balcony, which in turn overlooked the sea. It was indeed a beautiful restaurant, but he was in no mood to enjoy the aesthetic feast before him. So he just sat down, throwing his shades and his car keys on the table, and impatiently scrolled through his phone, wondering why wasn't she here? It's past the time she should have been waiting for me. And then he wondered, should I have a beer? But then he had doubts, would she be okay with that? What if she is conservative and didn't like the idea of him having beer when she was there? But then how could she be conservative? All these thoughts were rattling around in his head when he was interrupted by a very soft voice near his elbow. And he looked up to see the woman he had spoken to just a week ago, the woman that his father had fallen in love with apart from his mother, Mrs. Mekhla Joshi. And he looked up to see a very attractive elderly woman with twinkling eyes, a lovely smile, and yes, the telltale scar that ran right down her left cheek, from her cheek down to her neck. In fact, this was a scar that had brought his father, the well-known cosmetic surgeon, now no more, Dr. Manoj Verma, and Mrs. Mekhla Joshi together. She had been the survivor of a horrific accident which had taken the life of her husband, and she had barely just about escaped with her life, and she had almost lost her face, and if it hadn't been for the genius of his father's magical fingers, she would not have been able to get through the aftermath of the accident. And both of them had fallen in love, and it had been a beautiful relationship. Of course, none of this had been known to Yashwant's mother or himself. He didn't know it. It was known only in a letter that his father had left for him after to be handed over to him, and he had left it with his lawyer. So it was only after he read that letter that Yashwant knew all about this relationship and the fact that his father had had a mistress. It had been a huge shock to him at the time. But then he had dismissed it. He has, okay, fine, dad had an affair, it's done, and he's no longer here. But what had irked him the most was his dad had also left instructions to hand one of the most prized properties that they owned in Malabar Hill, one of the most poshest areas in Mumbai. The keys and the papers of the house had to be handed over to this woman. This had irked him a lot. Not that they hadn't been left comfortably off, they had everything that they could possibly need or want and much more. But the fact that his father, who had claimed in his letter that he had never really spent anything on this woman, it had just been a friendship and a beautiful friendship, why did he want to now hand over such an expensive property over to her? And he didn't want to do it. Yashwant was very clear that he wouldn't, because he couldn't hate his father, but he was determined that he would hate his mistress. And he had to do it for his mother, he thought. So that was why he had called her up a week ago, and they had spoken, and now was the first time that he was actually seeing her in person. So he didn't want to delay any further. So he started off by telling her, okay, thank you for coming on such short notice. But then she interrupted him and said, thank you for telling me that he passed away. I didn't know, I was out of the country. We haven't been in touch for a while. And her eyes filled up with tears that even Yashwant, in his irritated state of mind, knew were genuine. And she wiped away her tears, composed herself, and continued. I was with my daughter. She had some issues. Then when I got back here, I had problems with my landlord, and I was just sorting it out. Now, when he hears the word landlord, Yashwant's ears prick up, and he asks her, "So you're staying in a rented place?" Because he had known this woman to be she was well off, and she had a lot of she had a lot of property and so on. That's the idea that he had got. So she says, "Yes, I had to sell my last property to help out my daughter with her medical bills." but now I stay in a rental property. So he stops her there. He says, okay, so that's the reason why you need this property of dad's. I mean, see, you must have had a sordid, you both had a sordid affair, and I'm not really interested in that. But I don't think my mother would be able to deal with it if she knew that one of her, prized properties was being gifted to her husband's mistress. She stops him right there. Mrs. Mekla Joshi stops him right there and says, what did you say, a sordid affair? Yashwant sneers and sits back and says, well, what else could you call it? I don't want to sugarcoat it. She says, stop right there. That's the kind of conversation that we're having here. Look, I have a lot of work to do. I'll go. I think you should read your papers first. Have you read the papers? So he says, of course, I've skimmed through them. I read the letter in great detail. But the papers, I've skimmed through the papers. So she said, I think you should read those papers before we continue this conversation. So he says, okay, let me have a look. I have it with me right here. And he quickly draws out an envelope with a thick envelope, which he was carrying with him in the inner pocket of his blazer. He takes it out and he quickly starts skimming through it. He actually starts reading it. He reads it for a while and then slowly his face starts flushing with embarrassment. And after a while he slowly looks up to find her smiling very kindly at him and says, yes, Yashwant, that property belongs to me. So he says, how? I don't understand. She says, you see, when your father was treating me, I mean, he was the only reason why I lived. I don't know how I would have got through that time at that point of time. That's when I got to know that he was in a financial strain of some kind and it was bad. So it was my idea, even though I had to sell off most of my properties to clear my husband's debts. There's this property which I told him he could use. I gave it to him as a loan and I told him you can use it to mortgage or use as you wish and get out of your financial issue. And once that is done, you can return it to me if you want. So he refused. Your dad was not at all happy with it at first, the suggestion. He refused, but then finally, because he knew there was no other way out, he did accept it. And we decided to keep it a secret between ourselves. And he told me he would return it. So when you called me up and said that this was there in his will and he wanted to give it to me, I realized that he hadn't forgotten his word. And unfortunately, Yashwant, I'm not in a position to refuse right now because I don't have anything with me. When he hears this, Yashwant feels terrible and he quickly puts the papers in and pushes the envelope over to her and says, I'm so sorry, ma'am, I shouldn't have spoken like that. I should have known that my father wouldn't treat us so badly and hand over something that's my mother's to somebody else. I'm very sorry. I can understand why he had a friendship with someone like you, with a person like you. Thank you so much and I'm very sorry for what I said. So she says, no, not at all. How were you to know? I'm sure you wouldn't understand. And there's one thing I have to return to you though, she says, and she pulls out a slim jewelry box from her bag. And she pushes it opens it and, pushes it over towards him across the table. And he finds two heavily emerald encrusted gold bangles. And she says this was a gift from him to me. And I had refused it at first, but he looked so hurt that I made him promise that he wouldn't give me anything expensive or any other gift after that. And that's the only reason why I kept it. But I think now you should give it to your mother. You don't have to tell her, just give it to her. So he says, no way, and he pushes it back. This was a gift from my father to you and you deserve to keep it. I will not accept this or the papers to the house. I'm so sorry for what I said. And he gets up feeling hurt and suddenly very tired and, so it's like something was, the feelings he came with were now totally different and he didn't know how to process it. So when he stood up, she stood up to leave too, and Yashwant tells her, I have to really thank you because you have no idea what you've done for us. So she looks a little surprised and says, but is only this, nothing else that I have done for your dad? So he says, no, ma'am, you don't understand. He told me in one of maybe a couple of years ago that there was a time in his life when he was in such a bad financial crisis that he had thought of ending his life. He had reached that stage, and he said an angel had walked into his life at that point and helped him. And if you hadn't stepped in at that time, I understand now that you were the person who stepped in at that time, and if you hadn't, he may not have been alive beyond that year. So you have no idea what you've done for us. Thank you so much and sorry once again. Mrs. Mekla Joshi comes up and hugs him, and he doesn't push her away but falls into her embrace, and both of them shed tears of sorrow and happiness. And my story, The Rendezvous, ends there. I hope you liked it. Thank you.